She sought to dismantle his reputation on live television. His response redefined the game entirely. The message arrived as the afternoon shadows grew long, a brief sterile email from the producers of Sunrise Spotlight, one of the nation's most watched morning shows. They were requesting Kaylin Shaw, the visionary tech founder and CEO of Apexia, to appear as a guest on their forthcoming segment, Exploring Diversity in the Corporate World. Kaylin had seen this exact scenario unfold before, a mainstream outlet feigning a sudden interest in black innovators, parading them for a fleeting moment of performative applause before pivoting to the next fleeting trend. This time, however, was different. Apexia was no fledgling startup. They had just triumphed in securing a 9-figure defense contract, eclipsing some of the most monolithic titans in the industry. That victory wasn't a stroke of fortune. It was the culmination of 2 decades of relentless, grinding work. Yet he paused before accepting the invitation, a subtle disquiet settling in his gut. His assistant, Lena, immediately detected his unease. "Are you certain you want to go through with this?" she asked, her voice low. "You know what these programs are like. They adore a success story, but they relish tearing one down even more." Kaylin leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning softly. "I can handle it," he assured her. "Besides, it's national exposure." "Let's hear what they have to say." Lena sighed, a slow shake of her head betraying her worry. "Just don't allow them to bait you." He offered a nod, though a deeper instinct told him he understood the rules of this engagement perfectly. If this interview was indeed a trap, they were about to play chess against the wrong opponent. On the morning of the broadcast, Kaylin arrived at the QVC studios in New York. A sterile chill clung to the air in the green room. A young producer met him, her eyes barely lifting from a clipboard. "Mr. Shaw, thank you for coming. We'll get you mic'd in 5. There was no small talk, no attempt at a warm welcome, just the cold efficiency of a transaction. As he settled into the makeup chair, an assistant dusted his face with a practiced, detached air. On the wall-mounted monitor, the live feed of the show played out. A panel dissecting celebrity scandals, followed by a light-hearted cooking demonstration. Then a transition graphic filled the screen. Up next, the tech surge. Is it talent or tokenism? Kaylin's jaw locked. So that was their angle, but if they believed they held the advantage, they were poised for a profound shock. He had not yet grasped, however, just how far they were prepared to push. The set of Sunrise Spotlight was meticulously crafted to appear welcoming, with soft azure and gold tones and a polished glass coffee table separating the host's armchair from the guests. Robotic cameras glided like silent predators, capturing every subtle shift, every fleeting expression. Kaylin smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket as he took his seat opposite Serafina Croft, the show's formidable lead anchor, a veteran journalist with a reputation for merciless questions. She offered a smile, but it was a performance that never touched the coldness in her gaze. "Kaylin Shaw," she began, her voice a smooth, rehearsed melody, "CEO of Apexia." "A genuine American success story," Kaylin responded with a polite, measured nod. "I appreciate you having me." She leaned forward, almost imperceptibly, her fingers brushing against her cue cards. "Now, let's dive right in. Your company recently secured a $200 million government contract, outmaneuvering some of the most established names in technology. That's quite an achievement." Kaylin recognized the strategy instantly. Build him up first, create the illusion of respect for his accomplishments. He gave a carefully crafted response. "It was an exhaustive process, but yes, we put in the work. We engineered a security encryption system that simply outperformed what our competitors brought to the table. It's as straightforward as that." Serafina crossed her legs, a subtle shift in posture. "Some have described it as revolutionary, a deliberate pause, but others have begun to raise questions." Kaylin remained unflinching. "Questions?" She lifted a card, her eyes scanning the text before reading it aloud. "Certain industry analysts suggest that Apexia may have benefited from specific federal diversity initiatives. That companies like yours possess an inherent edge in these bids because government agencies are actively seeking to diversify their contractors. That perhaps this outcome wasn't solely about being the best, but about fulfilling a quota." There it was. the true purpose for his invitation. Kalen allowed a beat of silence to hang in the air before he spoke. I've encountered that line of reasoning before. It's peculiar, isn't it? When a black entrepreneur achieves a major win, it's attributed to special treatment. But when a legacy corporation, controlled by the same families for generations, lands those very same contracts, nobody ever questions it. The atmosphere in the studio thickened. Off-camera producers exchanged nervous glances. Serafina maintained her composure. So are you suggesting that race had no influence whatsoever on your success? Kalen let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Permit me to ask you this. When SpaceX was awarded its NASA contracts, was it because Elon Musk satisfied a diversity quota? When Jeff Bezos secured government deals for Blue Origin, was it because of his ethnic background? Or do we reserve that particular question only for when the CEO looks like me? Serafina's expression remained a mask of professional neutrality. So you don't feel these diversity programs are helpful? Kalen folded his hands on the table. They help level the playing field. But what people fail to comprehend is that the playing field was never leveled to begin with. But Serafina was far from finished. She had another move prepared, something held in reserve. Serafina's smile sharpened, like a razor's edge concealed in velvet. She glanced down at her cue cards. Then her eyes locked back onto Kalen's. Well, Kalen, let's speak about that playing field you just mentioned, she said, her tone transitioning from polite inquiry to something distinctly colder. You grew up in Oakland, California, raised by a single mother, attended public schools, and built your way up from nothing. It's an inspiring narrative. Kalen gave a slow, deliberate nod, sensing the trap being laid. Serafina pressed on. But here is what some people might be wondering. How does an individual with no Ivy League pedigree, no deep-seated family connections, rise from a struggling neighborhood to secure contracts that billion-dollar corporations consistently fail to win? She allowed the question to linger, the insinuation hanging thick and heavy in the air. How did you really get here? Did someone grease the wheels for you? Kalen tilted his head, as if weighing each word with immense care. It's called work, Serafina. Some of us don't have generational wealth or country club networks to leverage, so we are forced to build everything from the ground up. Serafina offered a small, dismissive nod, as if she were hearing his words but not truly listening. But you surely received assistance along the way, she insisted. Perhaps a mentor, a special program, something that provided an extra push? Kalen exhaled, a quiet, controlled breath. Yes, the help I received came in the form of working 3 jobs simultaneously while earning my engineering degree. The help came in the form of sleeping in my office while I coded my first software prototype because I couldn't afford to pay rent. That is the help I received. Her lips tightened into a thin line for a fleeting moment. The producers standing in the shadows behind the cameras were completely captivated. Now Serafina shuffled her cue cards once more. And yet, she continued, some would contend that black entrepreneurs today have more opportunities available to them than ever before. That programs such as affirmative action, minority business grants, and government incentives are specifically designed to open doors that were sealed shut decades ago. Kalen leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. You know what's truly remarkable? When a black business owner finds success, people invariably ask which programs assisted us. But no one ever asks which old money bank provided the seed funding for a white-owned startup. No one asks which family connections secured their admission into Stanford, or which golfing partner became their first major investor. He let that thought resonate for a moment before continuing. The reality is that success isn't distributed like a lottery ticket. People who look like me have to be twice as good merely to get a seat at the table. A palpable change swept through the room, the hushed tension of an audience, realizing they were witnessing something raw and unfiltered. Serafina, however, did not flinch. Instead, she smiled, the precise smile of a grandmaster who believes they have just cornered their opponent's king. That is a fascinating perspective, she said, her voice as smooth as polished marble. But let's address another element here, perception. She turned her body slightly, directing her focus toward the cameras. Kalen, you present yourself as a self-made man, a story of success. But let's discuss the public's perception of that story. Some argue that black entrepreneurs receive an unfair advantage when it comes to media coverage, that the narrative of overcoming adversity is inherently more marketable than the stories of thousands of white business owners who work just as hard but fail to garner the same headlines. Kaylin let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, so now the problem is that we get too much attention?" Serafina maintained her polished smile, but a subtle tightening in her posture betrayed her. She had not anticipated his amusement. "You're suggesting to me," he continued, "that in a world where 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are white men, where the vast majority of major tech funding continues to flow overwhelmingly to white-owned startups, the real issue is that people like me get too much press." Serafina tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I am simply pointing out that in the current climate, some people feel there is a pressure to elevate diversity over pure merit." Kaylin exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Merit, right." He glanced for a moment at the cameras, then his gaze returned to her. "Let me ask you a question, Serafina. Do you genuinely believe that if I were not exceptional at what I do, I would be sitting in this chair right now?" Her lips parted slightly, but before a response could form, he pressed on. "Do you think I arrived here because I played the diversity card? Or do you think I arrived here in spite of everything that was designed to keep me out?" The silence that filled the studio was more deafening than any of her previous questions. But Serafina was not finished, not quite, because she still held one last card to play, the one she believed was designed to finally break him. Serafina drew a slow, deliberate breath, shifting in her seat just enough to feign casualness. But Kaylin saw it, a fracture in the composed facade. She glanced at her cue cards one last time, then set them aside. She wanted to deliver this next part directly, without a script. "Kaylin," she began, tilting her head with feigned empathy, "I think it's fair to say you are passionate about this topic, and I respect that. But allow me to ask you something." Kaylin gave a slight wary nod, waiting. "Do you think perhaps that some of this outrage is exaggerated?" She paused, letting the loaded word hang in the air. "After all, your own success story proves that the system isn't nearly as stacked against black entrepreneurs as some people claim." The sheer audacity of it! Kaylin could feel a slow burn of anger rising within him, but he refused to let it show. Instead, he released another quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "You know," he said, his voice perfectly measured, "it's fascinating how people love to use one single success story as definitive proof that a systemic problem doesn't exist." Serafina's smile remained fixed, but a flicker of uncertainty appeared in her eyes. Kaylin leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Let me frame it this way for you. If one person manages to climb out of a burning building, do you point to them and declare, 'You see, the fire wasn't really that bad'?" Serafina opened her mouth, hesitated for a moment, then closed it. Kaylin was not done. "The fact that I made it through does not mean the system isn't broken. It simply means I had to fight twice as hard to navigate it." He allowed his words to settle in the charged air. Even the studio crew seemed frozen in place. Serafina adjusted herself in her seat, searching for a controlled, neutralizing response. "I understand your perspective, but let's consider another side of this." She angled herself toward the cameras again, her voice adopting that carefully neutral tone reserved for damage control. "Some might suggest your frustration isn't truly about race," she continued, "that it's actually about resentment toward larger, more established corporations. After all, you have publicly criticized big tech companies for their failure to hire more diverse executives." Kaylin tilted his head. "Resentment? No accountability?" "Absolutely." Serafina pressed her lips together for a beat. "Then what is your response to those who believe that in today's economy, success is based purely on hard work, not on race?" Kaylin exhaled sharply through his nose, then locked his eyes with hers. This was the moment. "I say," he began, "that people love to believe in fairy tales, especially when they are the ones benefiting from them." A ripple of stunned silence washed over the set. The kind of silence that has weight. "But let's be honest," he continued, his voice unwavering. Black entrepreneurs are still denied loans at twice the rate of their white counterparts. We still receive less than 2% of all venture capital funding, and even when we prove ourselves beyond any doubt, we still get asked if we truly deserved our success. Serafina sat motionless, listening but not truly hearing. "So let's stop pretending the system isn't rigged," Kalen said, his voice calm but unyielding. "It is, and the only people who don't see it are the ones it was built to work for." Silence. Pure, heavy, unbroken silence. The producers did not cut to a commercial. The control room did not intervene. This was raw and real. Serafina shifted again, finally looking genuinely uncomfortable. She opened her mouth to speak, but Kalen was not finished, because this was the moment that was about to send shockwaves across the entire country. Serafina cleared her throat, her eyes darting briefly toward the off-camera producers, but no rescue was coming. She had initiated this confrontation, and now she had to endure it. Kalen adjusted his watch, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to make everyone squirm. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "You know what the real problem is?" he asked, his voice softer now, yet somehow carrying more weight. Serafina hesitated. "What?" Kalen did not blink. "The bar isn't in the same place for everyone." She shifted slightly. "Meaning?" "I mean," Kalen said, "that a mediocre white man can fail his way to the top in this country, but a brilliant black man has to jump through flaming hoops just to get a chance." A producer in the wings cursed under his breath. They knew this was about to go viral. Kalen continued, his voice steady. "A white CEO can run a company into the ground, declare bankruptcy, lay off thousands of workers, and somehow land another executive position somewhere else. Meanwhile, a black CEO has one difficult quarter, and suddenly it's held up as proof that we were never ready for leadership." Serafina opened her mouth to interject, but he was not done. "And the best part," Kalen added, with a dry, humorless chuckle, "is that when we actually succeed, people like you sit across from us and question if we got here because of some special advantage." Silence. Serafina's jaw tightened. It was a minuscule movement, but the high-definition cameras captured it all. Kalen leaned forward just an inch, not in aggression, but with an air of finality. "You wanted to talk about fairness?" He let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Then let's begin by telling the truth." Another silence descended, but this one felt different. It was no longer about discomfort. It was about impact. Serafina's entire demeanor had changed. It wasn't just the studio audience watching Kalen now. It was the entire nation. And then came the moment. Kalen turned slightly, his gaze piercing the lens of the main camera. "I know what some of you are thinking right now," he said, his voice intimate, direct. "Some of you are nodding your heads because you have seen this, you have lived this." He held his gaze, creating a connection. "And some of you are sitting there, scowling, your arms crossed, telling yourselves this isn't real, that I'm just playing the victim, that it's all in my head." His lips pressed together for a beat before he delivered the final line. "But deep down, you know I'm right." The studio was utterly silent. No one seemed to breathe. And then, "All right, we need to take a quick break," a producer's voice crackled through the earpieces. Serafina forced a rigid, polite smile. "We will be back with more after this." The camera's red lights went dark, but the damage had been done. Within the hour, clips of the fiery exchange were everywhere. But the real storm was only just beginning. The clip detonated across social media like a demolition charge. By the time Kalen was back in his car, his phone was convulsing with notifications, texts, missed calls, a ceaseless flood on his screen. Twitter was ablaze. Kalen Shaw just exposed the media's inherent bias on live TV. This was powerful. Its truth hurts. The way he looked directly into the camera and called out the entire country, chills. And, simply, Kalen Shaw was right, but not everyone interpreted it that way. Here we go again, another successful man pretending he's oppressed. Cry me a river. Enough with the victim mentality. This guy just demonstrated why people are hesitant to hire activists. Play the race card all you want, but hard work speaks louder. Merit is what matters. Cable news channels seized the story within the hour. Some pundits lauded him as brave. Others condemned him as angry and combative. By lunchtime, Sunrise Spotlight had issued a meticulously crafted statement. We value open dialogue and a multitude of diverse perspectives. While today's discussion became more intense than anticipated, we stand by our commitment to fostering fair conversations. Kalen laughed aloud when he read it. Fair, right? His assistant Lena called him, her voice a mix of laughter and exasperation. Do you have any idea that you just set the entire internet on fire? Kalen rubbed his temple. That wasn't exactly my intention. Well, congratulations, she replied. You just became the most talked about entrepreneur in America. He offered no response. He knew what would follow, because viral moments are never just moments. They metastasize into battlegrounds, and the next 48 hours were about to become incredibly messy. But this was no longer just about him. By the following morning, the story had transcended social media, exploding into the national consciousness. Cable news anchors debated it endlessly on live television. Opinion columns flooded every major digital publication. Everyone had a take. Fox News, is Kalen Shaw the new face of corporate entitlement? CNN, Kalen Shaw's viral moment, a reckoning for America's myth of meritocracy. Business Insider, what Kalen Shaw's interview reveals about race and success in modern America. Meanwhile, Serafina Croft was in full damage control mode. On her show the next day, she delivered a carefully rehearsed monologue. I have great respect for Mr. Shaw and his accomplishments, but I stand by my questions. My duty as a journalist is to ask what the audience at home is thinking. If my questions were uncomfortable, that only proves how necessary they were. The translation was clear. She was not backing down. Kalen watched from his office, shaking his head in disbelief. Lena sat opposite him, scrolling through a cascade of emails. You know, she said, breaking the silence, we've just been inundated with new investor inquiries. Suddenly, everyone wants to work with us. Kalen smirked. Let me guess. The same people who wouldn't return our calls last year. Lena shrugged. I guess being controversial is good for business. But the fallout wasn't entirely positive. A few clients quietly withdrew their accounts. A major corporate partner abruptly decided to reevaluate their commitments. And then the death threats began. Sinister emails, anonymous phone calls, and even an unmarked package left outside the Apexia headquarters. Inside was nothing but a single sheet of paper with one word printed in bold block letters. Enough. Lena frowned as she held the message. You need to get security. Kalen let out a slow, weary breath, rubbing his temples. He had known this was coming. Any time a black man speaks too boldly, too unapologetically, this is the price. But retreating was never an option. And now he faced a critical decision. Would he allow the backlash to silence him, or was this merely the beginning of something much bigger? Kalen sat in his office, his gaze fixed on the city skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The preceding 72 hours had been a maelstrom of praise, backlash, threats, and opportunities. He thought about his younger self, the kid from Oakland who had to claw his way forward for every single inch of success, the one who had watched doors slam shut in his face while others strolled through without even knocking. And now, here he was at the very center of a national debate he had never sought, but one he could no longer ignore. Lena entered the room, her expression unreadable. We just received an offer. Kalen raised an eyebrow. From who? She placed a folder on his desk. A major network. They want you to do a televised special. A one-on-one, deep dive interview about race, business, and the system. Kalen exhaled slowly. So now they're willing to listen? Lena's lips curved into a slight smirk. It would appear so. She paused for a beat. What do you want to do? He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He could walk away from it all, let the noise fade, and return to the business of running his company. Or he could seize this moment, not for fame, not for attention, but to finally say all the things that no one in power wanted to hear. Kalen picked up the folder, flipping through the detailed proposal. Then he set it back down. He looked up at Lena, his decision made. "Tell them I'll do it." Her eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure?" He nodded, his resolve hardening. "Yes, but on my terms." Because if the system was determined to put him under a spotlight, he was damn well going to control the narrative. Kalen Shaw's viral moment was not just another fleeting internet controversy, it was a reckoning. It forced a conversation that people had been expertly dodging for decades, about race, about success, about who gets to rise without question, and who gets questioned relentlessly when they rise. Some called him an activist, some called him arrogant, some called him right. But one thing had become certain: nobody could ignore him anymore. So what do you think? Does success mean playing by the rules of a broken system? Or does it mean rewriting the rules entirely? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe more stories like this need to be told, subscribe.